Hello everyone, and by everyone I mean all you Outer Wilds cultists that wish you could play the game again for the first time. Welcome in. So, I recorded this a few years ago, but I'm just getting around to editing it now. Before we start though, I need to give a few disclaimers. First, if you haven't played Outer Wilds before, stop watching this. This game is too special to spoil it for yourself. Go play it first, then you can come back and watch as many Outer Wilds videos as you want. Second, now this is a big screw up on my part, but I somehow managed to break my translator tool. May have been a bad install, or maybe I messed with config files that I shouldn't have. I'm still not entirely sure. Either way, the translator didn't work. My apologies if this makes you want to yell at your screen. Since then I've gone back and played the game properly and watched countless playthroughs on YouTube, so I know the feeling of screaming internally at the streamer butchering your favorite game. Finally, in another rookie mistake, I lost all the mic audio for these recordings, just completely unusable. I did realize my F-up pretty soon after I finished the game, so to try to salvage it, I immediately watched my footage back and recorded what's essentially a commentary track of my thoughts and what was going through my head at the time I played it. Now that it's been a few years, I'm going to finally stop procrastinating and tackle the absolute mountain of editing it's going to take to cut this down into something watchable. I hope it comes out okay. With all that out of the way, let's get to it. After getting sidetracked at the Hanging City, it was time to head back to Ashtwin to continue exploring the rest of the towers. When I got over to Ashtwin, I remembered it's going to take some time for all the sand to drain off, and I had some time to kill, so I decided to head over to Embertwin to go talk to Chert. I parked the ship as close as I could get to Chert's camp and then went out to go talk to them. I tried to see if I could discuss anything I had found with Chert, but it didn't seem that I had learned anything I could talk to them about, so since I had some time to kill, I decided to do some exploring. When I looked around, I saw this archway in the side of a cliff that seemed to have an entrance further into the caves, so I decided to check that out. The inside of the cave was almost pitch black, so I had to turn it on my flashlight. And once I crossed a chasm with some cacti, I found an exit on the other side that seemed to cross the giant pit at the center of Embertwin's equator, so I headed back into the cave to see if I'd missed anything. And when I went back, there was a staircase leading up to another small cavern. Inside the cavern, I got prompted that there was an unidentified signal nearby, so I busted out my signal scope and identified a cave shard on the quantum fluctuations frequency. Next to the rock was a lore wall, which, again, still can't translate, nor could I translate the writing that was on the floor, and when I turned around, the rock had disappeared, as quantum rocks are wont to do. So I spun in circles for a bit and watched as the rock disappeared, then reappeared, and disappeared, reappeared. And then I thought, hey, while there's a rock here, I'm going to have some fun with this, and started to play around with it. I shot my scout onto the rock so I could try to track and see where it would go when I looked away from it, because the scout stays attached to it and travels along with the rock. Looking around, I could see that the rock was jumping quite far away, 170 meters to start, and then 217 meters away. All of the places that the rock jumped to seemed to be inside the planet, so this rock was likely jumping towards other caves. Every time the rock left, it got pitch black, so I shot at my scout to get some light. And then I had an idea. I wonder if I could put my scout in the place where the rock spawns so that when the rock does spawn in, my scout will clip through it. And sure enough, it did. I took some pictures from inside the rock, and somehow I could see outside, including myself, and the weird occlusions where the exterior of the rock was, and that was pretty odd, but also kind of fun. Then I had a different idea. I wonder if I can make myself clip inside the rock when it teleports. The only problem was I couldn't see when I turned around, so I started shooting my scout up on the ceiling to make some light, trying to get the rock to clip into me. It didn't appear that the clipping would work while I was standing on the ground, so then I had the idea, what if I'm like slightly in the air and the game thinks I'm not standing in this spot? Will the rock clip into me then? And again, if I'm trying to look around, the rock won't spawn into me, so I had to just keep shooting the scout up in the air, try to hop up just a little bit and get the rock to spawn on top of me. It kind of worked when I took a step away, so I thought maybe I'm on the right track here, and I think I can actually get this to clip. Finally, my scout launch got obstructed, so I was pretty sure that, yeah, the rock was clipping into me, but unfortunately when I had turned on my light, it appeared that I had just barely gone to the side of the rock, so it didn't quite work. This time when I launched the scout, something weird happened. The scout didn't stick to the ceiling and nothing happened. So I recalled the scout again, lit up the roof, and everything appeared to be normal, so I did it again. Scout disappeared. Once again, scout disappeared. When I looked through the pictures, my scout appeared to be in a completely different cave without the rock. At this point, I was pretty confused and wasn't sure exactly what was going on. The next time I shot the scout actually stuck onto the ceiling, and when it appeared, I was in an entirely different cave than where I had started. I began to run out of oxygen, and it seemed like this weird scout launching behavior only happened when I was standing on top of the rock. So I jumped back up and tried to launch my scout onto the rock to see what would happen. Then, when I pulled my scout and shot it back up towards the ceiling, the same behavior happened. So I looked down and shot it onto the rock instead, and this time it stuck, but one more time I was in a different cave, this time with a different lore wall that I had seen before and a staircase in the back. It seemed like every time I pulled my scout and the room went dark, the rock would disappear. So I tried using my flashlight to use light, and every time I clicked it on and off, the rock would appear or disappear. Then, if I hopped on top of the rock and clicked my flashlight on and off, I would also transport with the rock. Just like it works when I launch my scout onto the rock and then look away. The scout travels with the rock. On the next loop, I wanted to go back and check that out a bit more. So I found the same cave I had found before and then found the rock. And continued to play around with my flashlight. Every time I turned the flashlight off and I was in pitch darkness, the rock would move. And so long as I was standing on top of the rock, I would travel with it. The rock took me to a few different caves. One of which appeared to be a dead end, but the other one had a staircase and a tunnel, so I hopped out of this one and followed the tunnel, which again led me to a section where the falling sand column travels along Ember Twin, and continuing down the path, it led me all the way to the Crash Nomai escape pod. I turned around and went back to the cave I had came from, and then decided to check out what was up the stairs. The other side of the tunnel led me to a different archway where Chert's camp could be seen in the distance that appeared to be on the opposite side of the archway I had originally come from. I hopped over to Chert's camp to talk to Chert and see if maybe he knew something about this weird rock I had found. But again, it still didn't appear that I had anything new to talk to him about. At this point, I thought, yeah, that was pretty cool that I found that rock and learned that I can travel with it just like my scout does, but the original reason I came to the Hourglass Twins was to explore the towers on Ash Twin, and by this point enough sand had probably drained off of Ash Twin that I could access some of those towers, so I got back in the ship and headed over to Ash Twin. The sand had just drained off enough to reveal a couple of the towers and none of the ones I really wanted to explore, so instead I flew the ship back over to Ember Twin over to Chert's camp so I could take a nap by the fire and make time pass a little more quickly. Once I woke up and got back in my ship, it appeared that a decent amount of sand had drained off of Ash Twin, and I could access quite a few of the towers, so now seemed like a good time to head over there, park the ship, and go check out where the rest of the teleporter pads would take me. I learned my lesson to not park the ship on the equator last time, let the column of sand suck my ship up to Ember Twin, so I parked it a little off the equator and then headed into the towers to continue exploring. The first tower I came to was the one that took me to Brittle Hollow, so I skipped that one and continued down the path, and came to this tower that appeared to resemble a tornado. It had an elevator from below that brought me to this central room where the bridge was, but wouldn't take me any further up. So instead I went outside and took the spiral ramp that headed up to the next floor. On the upper level was the room with the teleporter pad. There were 2 dead Nomai in spacesuits on the floor, and a fully intact glass ceiling, so if the sand was to pass over me, I wouldn't be sucked up. I looked up into the sky and waited to see which planet this teleport pad would take me to. The sandfall would end up blocking my view of the planet when I actually did get teleported, but previously I could just barely see Giant's Deep in the background, and when Giant's Deep lined up overhead, it took me to Giant's Deep. I had previously seen this teleporter pad on Statue Island, but that was a little while ago, so I headed out of the teleporter pad to go explore, went across this bridge until I recognized, oh, I know where I am. I'm on Statue Island. I've been here before, I've explored everything there is to see here. I'm just going to head back onto that teleporter pad and go back to Ash Twin. I hopped out of the Giant's Deep Tower and continued down the line, going through the Brittle Hollow Tower next. And then I had to rush to the next tower before the falling column of sand engulfed me and sucked me up to Ember Twin. And thankfully I made it inside just in time for that not to happen. This tower was the large stacked circular structure with pine trees inside. I stood in the teleporter, looked up, and waited to see which planet this would teleport me to. My view of the solar system was blocked by the sun when the teleport actually happened, but when I got out, it appeared that I was back on Timber Hearth. And it had spit me out pretty close to the Know My Mines, so once again I hop back to the Ash Twin to keep exploring the rest of the towers. I continued down to the path to the next set of towers just as the sandfall was overhead and attempted to step on a teleporter, but I forgot I stepped into the tower that didn't have a roof, and when it came overhead, the sand sucked me up. By this point, it was becoming pretty evident that the towers were going in the order of the solar system. Giant's Deep was the furthest away, then Brittle Hollow, then Timber Hearth, so forth. And that the towers kind of looked like their destinations. The Giant's Deep one resembled a tornado. The Brittle Hollow one kind of looked like a piece of Brittle Hollow and it had a gravity crystal inside. The Timber Hearth one looked like a geyser mountain and had pine trees inside. So logic would dictate the next set of planets in the solar system would be the Hourglass Twins. And because there were two towers here, it would make sense that one would go to Ember Twin and one would go to Ash Twin. Since the one without the roof seemed like it wouldn't take me to Ember Twin because the sandfall would suck me up before Ember Twin got overhead, I instead went over to the one with a glass ceiling and waited for the sandfall and Ember Twin to come overhead. Once the sandfall had gone directly overhead, the teleporter pad activated and sent me to Ember Twin, and it spit me out on the other side of the building with the big solar panel and the black hole experiment. At this point, the sand on Ember Twin was getting pretty full, and the sun was looking just about ready to explode. So rather than continue playing with the other tower here with the broken pad, I wanted to go over to the tower that resembled the sun, because that one had a room with a hallway full of cacti that I had to navigate in order to get to the Know My elevator to reach the teleporter pad. So this seemed like a good time to try to parkour my way through that hallway, and if I died by cactus, so be it. Navigating the hallway was a lot harder than I thought it would be. Every time I touched a cacti, I got pachinkoed into more cacti. I barely managed to patch up my suit when another cactus poked me, and then several more cactuses poked me, and before I knew it, I was poked to death. I can be a bit stubborn when it comes to these things, so this time I headed directly back to Ash Twin and directly to the Sun Tower because I really wanted to get through that hallway and into that teleporter pad. So I parked my ship near the tower and waited for enough sand to drain off so I could access the entryway to the cactus room. I could start to see the lights above the doorway to the cactus room, but the sandfall was on its way, so I had to get out of the way and wait for it to pass. Once it passed, I could start to see the top of the entryway to get inside, so I impatiently slammed my head against it, wishing I could crouch down and get inside there. And eventually I was able to clip through. Turns out, if you get here early enough, the sand's actually covering the cacti and you can just walk through this room, no parkour needed, so I thought I was in for a few loops of struggling and dying and getting poked to death by cacti, but it turned out it wasn't that hard actually. I just needed to walk on top of the sand and yeah, get there no problem. The reticle overhead briefly aligned with the space station, but I didn't get teleported and was concerned for a second until the reticle aligned with the center of the actual sun and I was teleported onto the place I had seen it in the scout before. I followed the Nomai gravity crystal paths around in an L shape until I reached a gigantic door with some Nomai writing discs floating nearby. When I opened the door, I was greeted to one of the coolest sights in the entire game. I was so in awe by this view that I accidentally floated out of the door and in a panic tried to get back as quick as I could. Because if my experience last time when I flew the ship here, I knew the gravity here was very strong and one wrong move would send me hurtling into the sun. There were some broken pieces of what I assumed used to be a bridge floating in my way, so I had to wait for them to rotate around until I could get a clear view of the entryway beyond. Once I felt like it was as good as I was going to get, I launched myself off and deftly avoided the broken pieces of walkway, locked onto the entrance hall, and managed to slide right inside. The other side of this station appeared to be a gigantic dome structure, with several pieces of Nomai spacesuits and staffs lying around, and plenty of bookshelves on the wall where Nomai would presumably place all their scrolls. I boosted my way up to the second floor, and up there I found another Nomai statue with its eyes closed, so this one wasn't linked to anybody. And outside of the big glass dome was an absolutely gorgeous view of the entire solar system. Other than aura farming, this place didn't seem to have any particular purpose up here, so I jumped down and then continued to explore the hallway down below. This led me to a large room that was facing directly into the sun, which once again held another Nomai statue with its eyes closed, and a mural on the wall, depicting a Nomai holding a scale with the symbol of the sun on one side and the symbol of the Big Bang on the other. I wouldn't quite realize this yet, but that mural would be the key to cracking exactly what the purpose of this station was, and how it would fit into the larger mechanisms the Nomai had at play. A dead Nomai on a bench held an ash twin projection stone, so I picked it up and took it over to the projection pool. When I inserted the projection stone into the pool, it had brought me to the same space I had seen before with the Nomai glowing masks rotating around the structure. But this time I noticed something I hadn't noticed before, the sound of falling sand. The same sound I had heard on Ash Twin and Ember Twin, and there was the same glowy rocks that I had seen coating the outside of Ash Twin. At this point I had finally made the connection that this space it was showing me was the inside of Ash Twin, which honestly I should have clocked earlier, with it being called the Ash Twin Projection Stone and whatnot. But that meant I knew exactly what I had to do. I had to go back to Ash Twin and see if I could find a way inside. I went back to the exit and hopped off for another spacewalk over the sun, and thankfully managed to get back to the other side without too much issue. I made my way back to the sun tower through the teleport pad, opened up the working side of the broken door, and then started to look for a way to get inside of the core of Ash Twin. On previous loops, I had explored the surface of Ash Twin pretty thoroughly. I probably didn't show that, cut it out. But it didn't appear that there were any entrances or ways into the glowing rock sphere from the outside. So I was trying to rack my brain thinking of other ways I could get inside of Ash Twin. I orbited around the planet, starting to count up the towers I had seen and places I have been. This tower went to Giant's Deep. The next one went to Brittle Hollow, Timber Hearth, and finally we had the 2 towers, one of which went to Ember Twin, and the other one I still didn't know where it went. But given the patterns of how these towers work, and that these appear to be the locations for the Hourglass Twins, it would make sense if this teleporter went to Ash Twin. Well, I'm already on the surface of Ash Twin, so where could the teleporter possibly go but inside of Ash Twin to the space with the glowing mask I had seen in the projection zone. I stood in the teleporter pad and waited again to see where it might take me. And once again was sucked up by the sand. Predictable result is predictable, but I need to figure out how to make this work, so it was a necessary step in the process. I continued to stand on the pad and waited and waited and waited for something to teleport me somewhere, periodically stepping outside of the tower to let the sandfall pass. But no matter how much I waited there, the teleporter never activated. At this point, the only thing I hadn't tried was being on the teleporter pad directly when the sand was overhead, but that wasn't going to work because the sand would suck me up and take me to Ember Twin. So then I had the idea, well, if the sand's going to suck me up, but a ceiling will prevent me from being sucked up by the sand, maybe if I blocked the ceiling with something, say, a Parthian ship that's roughly the same size as this tower and fits almost like a glove, maybe the ship will briefly protect me from being sucked up long enough for this warp tower to activate. Worth a shot, right? But no, all that did was get my ship and myself sucked up in the sand and hurling towards Ember Twin. My poor ship got launched into space, but I managed to get out of the path of destruction just in time to not go towards Ember Twin and instead come back down to Ash Twin. At this point, it had been quite a while, and I was getting pretty aggravated and really determined to figure out when the hell this teleport activated. So this time I decided to stick my scout in it and wait on the only portion with above head cover that I could find. When the sandfall came back around, my scout got teleported when it was directly in the middle, and I chased after it trying to catch a ride alongside the scout. And it worked! I was finally inside the space that I had seen so many times before. The ship log let me know that this space was called the Ash Twin Project, a hollowed out chamber inside of Ash Twin. The energy cables from the surface are plugged into a protective casing at the center of the planet. The first area I came to was the projection pool surrounded by the Nomai statue masks. There was a lot of Nomai writing in this building, and seems as it took me so long to get here, I thought maybe this might be the time where I finally learn how to translate the text. So I hovered over every single piece of writing I could find, and yeah, no, still no translator. The end of the loop music started to kick in, and I began to panic as I realized I didn't have much time left to explore this space. I moved this glowing Nomai ball along the track then up, which caused a container at the very center of the structure to open. The final glowy orb I found I moved down, which made the structure stop spinning, which also coincidentally killed the artificial gravity inside this place since we were inside the core of the planet, and allowed me to float up towards the center of the structure. Inside I was prompted to remove a warp core, which kind of looked like the warp cores I had seen before, but a bit different. When I picked it up, all the power went out and the music went dead silent, including the end of loop music, which really freaked me out. I thought, this feels kind of important, and maybe I should not be fucking with this, so I pretty much put it back immediately, and then turned the gravity back on inside the structure. When the music stopped, I knew the supernova was imminent, so I tried to quickly grab a projection stone and see what I could see through the projection pool, but I was a bit too late and the sun had already exploded. But when the supernova went off, I didn't die. Instead, the cables coming from the solar panels outside started to glow a brilliant blue, and the Nomai mask started sending glowing blue bits of what appeared to be Nomai text sending up towards the center of the structure, which had generated a black hole where the warp core was. Eventually, the black hole ceased to be, and instead of dying, I got the purple lines I had only previously seen when I was extremely far outside of the solar system. This was really weird and different, and I had to take some time to digest what I had just seen and figure all this out. Throughout the game, I had collected several different puzzle pieces, and the Ash Twin project was the key to putting them all together. The Ash Twin project seemed to be very intricate, and must have been a big undertaking for the Nomai. But what was its purpose? There appeared to be three main components of the Ash Twin project: the Nomai mask sculptures, the warp core, and the giant solar panels. Let's start with the sculptures. In the beginning of the game, the Nomai statue in the museum looked at me, opened its eyes, and then stole my memories. At the end of every loop, a Nomai mask appears and plays my memories from that loop back to me. And on Statue Island, I found a mural depicting how this memory transfer process works. A statue pairs with someone, then that person's memories get transferred to the statue. The statue then uploads those memories to a mask, and the mask transmits the memories back to that person. Now let's move on to the warp core. From the black hole on Brittle Hollow, I learned that anything that falls into a black hole will be transported to its corresponding white hole. At the Black Hole Forge on Brittle Hollow, I learned the Nomai were capable of harnessing the power of black and white holes into warp cores, allowing them to teleport throughout the solar system. In the Black Hole Experiment building on Ember Twin, I learned that not only do black holes transport things in space, but they also transport things back in time. Normally, this effect isn't very noticeable, but when I routed the power away from the Sunless City and towards the Black Hole Experiment, it resulted in my scout traveling further back in time. So much so, that it actually gave me enough time to prevent the scout from entering the black hole in the first place, and in doing so destroying the fabric of space-time. My bad. At the center of Ash Twin is a different kind of warp core. Black hole and white hole cores are placed directly next to each other, so it must be used for time travel, not teleportation. Finally, that brings us to the solar panels. There are two very large solar panels on Ash Twin, which feed directly into the center of the planet and connect to the warp core. When the supernova happens, the solar panels go Super Saiyan and feed a crazy amount of energy into the warp core. This triggers the black hole in the warp core to activate, and the Nomai masks below start transmitting memories into the black hole. Now it's time to piece all that together using the good old 5 W's. Who, what, when, where, and why. So, who made the Ash Twin project? The Nomai. Where is the Ash Twin project? At the center of Ash Twin, inside a sphere of ore from Timberhearth that can shield the inside from a supernova, at least temporarily. When does the Ash Twin project trigger? At the end of every loop, right after the sun goes supernova. What is the purpose of the Ash Twin project? Essentially, it's a device that creates the time loop we're stuck in. Here's how it works. The sun goes supernova, which causes the solar panels to collect a crazy amount of energy. This energy feeds into the warp core at the center of the planet, which causes the warp core to trigger. Then, the Nomai masks transmit the memories stored inside of them into the black hole. Because the black hole is being supercharged by the supernova, the memories got sent back in time quite far, relatively speaking, about 20 minutes. Back on Timberhearth, I wake up back at the campfire with all the memories stored in my Nomai mask. Memories from a future that never actually happened, which is why I never actually die. Pretty mind-blowing, huh? I did confirm this theory on the next loop by going back to the Astron project, pulling the warp core and waiting. It took a little while, but the supernova eventually engulfed me and I got another "You are dead" end credit screen, but sans kazoo music this time. The only reason I got the purple lines instead last time is because I ran out of memories to receive. Makes sense, right? So, the only question left is why did the Nomai build the Ash Twin project? This question was a bit harder to answer, but was eventually explained by something I had found quite recently, the mural on the space station orbiting the sun. This mural depicted a Nomai balancing the sun and the Big Bang on a scale. The implication here is that the Nomai had a decision to make, a decision they had to weigh heavily before acting. The Nomai would be able to find the birthplace of the universe, but in doing so, they would need to sacrifice the sun. Ultimately, they decided that finding the birthplace of the universe was more important, so they built the station to trigger the sun to go supernova, which would then supply the Ash Twin project with the power it needed to create a time loop. So, if the Nomai made a device to intentionally cause the sun to go supernova, is that how they all died? It would neatly explain why it seems like all the Nomai died suddenly and at the exact same time. The only problem is, the solar system still exists, so that can't have been what happened back then. But maybe it's what's causing the supernova now? Again, the problem with that theory is that our sun isn't the only one going supernova. Every star is. Maybe there are other Nomai out in the galaxy and they all built similar stations, but why wait so long to trigger them? No, the more likely explanation is that our species simply exists at an unfortunate point in time. We get to experience the heat death of the universe. There's nothing we can do to stop what's coming. Kind of a bummer. Oh well, no time for the stages of grief because despite how universe-shattering all those revelations are, I still have some lingering questions. There's 3 mass transmitting memories into the black hole, but to my knowledge, only Gabbro and I are receiving those memories. Who does the 3rd mask belong to? If the supernova didn't kill the Nomai, what did? The Nomai seem to go through a lot of effort to build the Ash Twin project, but how does a time loop help them find the birthplace of the universe? And probably most importantly, what could possibly be so special about the birthplace of the universe that the Nomai were willing to blow up the sun in order to find it? Thankfully, before they all died, the Nomai set up a handy-dandy supernova trigger time loop. I have all the time in the universe to find answers to those questions. So instead of fretting over the end of the universe, let's count our blessings and get back to exploring.